Drummond.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's an honour to follow the Honourable Lady from Oxford, Western Abingdon, and I think she spoke very wisely on many of the issues, and I suspect the Minister will have listened to that carefully. I want to start by thanking all our personnel who are currently operating in the Eastern Mediterranean and East of Suez. Even in peaceful times, this is an area which calls for the highest professionalism and alertness. And when we're faced with the challenges that we have now, the stress on them is even greater. Our interest in the area around Yemen predates the Suez Canal because of its place on our original sea route to India around the Cape. The Aden Protectorate, where I was born, was a major trading base which has continued with 15% of the world shipping and 30% of global container traffic depending on the freedom of the navigation in the Red Sea through the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. We must be realistic about the motivations of the Houthis in these attacks and their piracy. The forgotten civil war in Yemen has been going on since 2013 with a ceasefire in place for much of the last 15 months. Yet Yemen, and even more so the Houthis, only seem to have exploded into our consciousness of this country with the attacks on shipping, although it is debated in this place regularly. The ceasefire in Yemen has not been perfect, and acts of violence have been carried on at a low level. The Houthis have gained much from the peace talks, although they have an appalling human rights record, using sexual violence against women and the exploitation of children, and the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee talked about a few more of those. But I am concerned that the entire ceasefire is now jeopardised because of the Houthis' actions and our response. Additionally, the Houthis are clear that they see a linkage between their actions in the Red Sea and the situation in Gaza. And I say to them, attacking ships will not help the Palestinian cause. Targeted strikes by the US, the UK and allies will continue to protect shipping. However, the consequences of a prolonged series of strikes for the Yemeni people will be appalling. I cannot stress enough the catastrophe that will follow if the Houthis shut out humanitarian aid, if the ceasefire collapses, or if navigation around its coast becomes impossible. Yemen imports 90% of its food, and there are already 17 million people at risk of famine. 70% of the Yemeni population live in the areas that the Houthis currently control. And financing of the UN Humanitarian Response Plan has dropped from 55% of requirement in 2022 to 38% in 2023, and it's not even been announced for 2024. Most of Yemen's imports come through the Hodeidah port, so if the port becomes inoperable, the consequences will be severe. I urge extreme caution about any move to proscribe Ansar Allah because of the risk of destroying humanitarian effort which could follow. 50% of humanitarian funding comes from the United States, and most of this is needed in Houthi-controlled areas. I know the United States has been mindful of that in applying its special designation on the Houthis, and I'm sure, having raised it with the Prime Minister yesterday, that our government will be cautious too. Even with the ceasefire in place, the threat has remained to everyone in Yemen because the economy is so badly damaged. Collapsing and insecure societies breed radicalism and become threats to global security. So we must keep up our diplomatic efforts to save the ceasefire, and we should be cautious about seeing Iran behind every action the Houthis take. Iran does not have full control of their actions. They very much act independently, although they could stop providing intelligence, weapons and finance and work towards a de-escalation in the area. The Houthis are an organisation which includes many people who defected from the previous Yemeni regime, sadly trained and armed by the West. There are remains of Western munitions being used against the coalitions supporting the Yemeni government. The Houthis have cooperated with the UN on the tanker Safar, which posed a huge pollution threat to the entire Red Sea, and they've been allowing humanitarian agencies to carry on their work. So it's very concerning that they're now threatening to shut these agencies out. Equally, we must make sure that any sanctions we impose do not stop humanitarian access. The UK has been a leader in aid, and I'm grateful to the government for its support for the Yemeni people. But I also want to pay tribute to the UN Special Envoy, Hans Grunberg, who I met last year and who is working incredibly hard for a final peace process. How we respond to a crisis at the pinch points either side of the Bab el-Mandeb will be watched by other potential aggressors eyeing other opportunities. This is a key test of our return east of Suez. It is a strategy which commits us to respond to threats in the Malacca Strait, the South China Sea, or the seas around Taiwan. It requires our alliances like AUKUS to be military effective and not just defence export opportunities. Those alliances need to be founded on a belief by our partners that we will show up to bolster them when they're at the first line of defence. But we can only project power from a secure base in the UK, and we're responding to our personnel challenges with the excellent work done by Rick Haythornthwaite. However, we need to see results, and the major issues of service accommodation persist along niggly things like lack of free access to Wi-Fi on bases. Our personnel need secure and happy families' lives at home, and when they deploy, their effectiveness depends on knowing that their loved ones will be cared for. If we want people to fight for our values, we have to make sure they feel valued themselves. Ships, tanks and aircraft without crews are useless. Finally, while we are right to act to deter Houthi violence against international shipping, I do urge the House to remember that this is one chapter in a long and tragic civil war. So far, our attitude towards it has been supportive of the Yemeni people who are suffering so much, and I hope that will continue.